different terms and vocabulary. That's the reality of the situation. You know, you can only talk about this, you know, women, money, guns, etc. for so long before it's just going to be like, all right, what else you got? Nelly's realizing that now. I'm glad 50 realized that very quickly. You know, Eminem had a handle on that a long time ago, but we were sitting there wowed by the idea that he was this white guy who knew all these words. You know, we should not embrace ignorance all the time. I'm glad President Obama, and I'm hoping that they'll change the law. We can vote for him 3, 4, 5 more times, because until we're ready to back him up as a people, and what I mean by that is have more people, you know, who are ready to step up to the challenge post-Obama, I'm a little concerned, because we got a lot of problems to address, and he's sort of opened the social umbrella for us to go ahead and do that to keep, you know, society off a while, because now he's the focus. He's the black guy. So everybody's like, look at me, everybody, look at me, look at me, look at me. Black community, fix your problems. Black community, fix your problems. Everybody looking at me, everybody looking at me. Because as soon as the spotlight shines off me, it's going back to you. And if you're not speaking and saying the things that need to be said, you're going to get lost. And that's the reality. So,
I think the comment I want to add is, where did the whole notation of being educated is being white? And the only thing I can think about in history and just from research is from, you know, slavery times, when we looked at the man who was educated, the slave master, or the individual who we looked to for advice was, or the person that we didn't understand was the white man, because we didn't understand his language in a sense. And that notation is kind of matriculated up. It has gone forward, and it's something that is sad. And I had a personal experience with it when I came back from the States, and I was military bred. And you know, coming back, and you go to a predominantly African American elementary school, you're not accepted, so forth and so on, because you sound educated. It starts at a young age, where I honestly, when I came back to America, I didn't know what the word, excuse me, panelist, nigga was. And it was on a basketball court when I was introduced to the word nigga. He said, "Pass the ball, nigga." And I said, "What? Like, who is nigga?" And I was like, "My name is Dominic J. Artist the First." He was like, "No, you nigga pass the ball." So, like a nigga, I pass the ball. And it's something that is ingrained at a young age, but you know, the whole notation of being educated is being white, and what Lee said was really hit home. You know, we have to really esteem each other. We have to really, you know, when somebody does good, makes A on the test, and you make an 85 and somebody made a 90, don't be like, dang. Like, celebrate the person. You know, encourage that person. And when you do that, that propels them to a further destiny. Every word that you say has capacity. So if you speak dehumanizing words to an individual, over time, they will look at themselves in the mirror and think less of themselves. And when you encourage the word, when you give them encouraging words, you know, they look at life and they're more optimistic, they're more hopeful. And so that's just one thing I would like to say.
I think it's also important for us to understand sort of the ontological perspectives of understanding the history of certain words and ideologies. If you think about concepts like cultural epochs and eugenics and people like G. Stanley Hall, I mean, there was a point in time in the United States of America where you had scientists, political scientists, biologists. They were trying to prove through scientific theory that basically anything that was associated with blackness was of savagery and less than educational or had lower standards. So, you know, when you take situations like that, and as we as individuals who are aspiring in higher education, you have, say for example, G. Stanley Hall, who was on a number of dissertation advisors for during the early part of the 1900s. You had individuals who were getting Ph.D.s still trying to prove this as a theory. And what happens if you're a black student coming to one of these historically white institutions and G. Stanley Hall is your advisor? So a part of, you know, what we're learning in some of these areas like psychology and economics, you know, we're really at a point where we're really changing the dynamic, because that wasn't really geared towards black people from a positive standpoint. And so I think we have to understand that. And also we have to understand that over time, you know, as African Americans, you know, we are really charged with the task of providing opportunities to think about these ideologies from a different perspective. So I think, you know, we have to understand the historical significance behind these words that we use to classify and categorize ourselves. You know, even when we talk about misogyny and, you know, the whole Sarah Bartman issue, you know, that wasn't something that we created, but, you know, we continue to perpetuate that over the years through either music videos or advertising or whatever. So I think we have to put in perspective, because even if you take higher education, you take black schools, well, you have, you know, families like Phelps, Stokes. There's a very good book called The White Architects of Black Education. And a lot of even the private historically black institutions, like Spelman, for example. Spelman didn't have a black person as the president of his institution until the late 1990s. You know, you have to look at all of these other institutions, and why were these institutions created? Some of these institutions created, again, to sort of free, these are, you know, quotes that are to free us from our savagery. So I think it's about understanding the history and ontological perspective.